Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Wine, Women, and Words. And joining me today, we don't have Michele as co-host, but we do have Lilo, who will be sitting in, though you can't see her, but she will be sitting in and judging us all for our reading choices, because that's what my dog likes to do. But our special guest here today is Kris Waldherr, and we're here to talk with her about her book, Unnatural Creatures, and also her tarot book. So thank you, Kris, so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me, Diana. This is just so much fun.
Yes, I mean, before, for a good 15 minutes or so, we were just sitting here talking, and it was like, oh yeah, we
I
have a
know,
podcast that
shooting
we
the
should.
breeze like at H&S way back when over the summer, having a good time.
Yeah, it's so easy. You and I can sit here and we can just talk about
Oh,
everything without any
yeah,
issue.
yeah, indeed.
So
Cheers.
yes, cheers. So we'll actually discuss the book this time. We'll, instead of like our other stuff. So for those who are not familiar with Unnatural Creatures, could you give us a little bit of a synopsis of it?
Absolutely. It is a retelling of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which is one of my very, very favorite books, but it's retold from the point of view of Victor Frankenstein's mother, his bride, and his servant. I mean, the shortcut, if you want to do like the elevator pitch, it's the feminist retelling of Frankenstein, so to speak. The one thing I think that I'm really proud of with Unnatural Creatures is that I really delve deeply into the political environment of the late 18th century, which was when Frankenstein took place. And to my surprise, I realized that, we all know about the French Revolution and what happened and this and that, and Marie Antoinette losing her head and all that. But there was also at the same time a revolution going on in Geneva, which was right at the edge of France. And I had no idea that between around that same time that there were several revolutions that happened. So I wove that very much into my retelling of Frankenstein from the women's point of view, which influenced all my characters in different ways. So that was really, really fascinating.
Mhm.
And I also sort of took the point of view that the real monster of the story is Victor Frankenstein.
Yes.
So, because he's not, if you kind of read between the lines in Mary Shelley's book, and I read every single edition that has been published of it, as well as her 1816 draft, he doesn't come off very well. And the women in the various drafts are all kind of projections of his narcissism. So I spent a lot of time trying to peel back the layers to see who they really were. Who was Caroline, his mother? Who was Elizabeth, his fiance, later bride? Who was Justine, the nursemaid, who ends up having her own very dramatic story, which if you haven't read Frankenstein, I'm not going to spoil it, but you should read it. So that's kind of the way that I presented it. And to my extreme pleasure, it's been getting really great reviews.
It's a
So
great book.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm halfway through it. I make a point of never fully finishing the books before I
Okay,
get
so
to
no
read them.
spoilers.
Yeah, I try to avoid some of the spoilers. I mean, I've read Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, and I've read it a few times. It's one of the few books because I don't reread a lot of books. I'm not one of those people
Oh,
who,
it's so powerful. It's so
yeah.
powerful. And what I love about Frankenstein is that I've read it so many times, and every time I've read it, I've had a different take on it. Like I first read it when I was 12 years old. At the time, I was like, oh, poor Victor. It's so sad what happened with the creature and this and that. And then reading it though, after I became a mother, I was like, he is the worst parent ever. I hate him. So it's definitely, I now see Frankenstein as this cautionary tale about the dangers of bad parenting, because what happens after Victor creates his creature? He immediately abandons him to wander around the world, rejected by all of these people who treat him very cruelly. But that's not the only example of bad parenting in Frankenstein. You have, for example, Elizabeth Lavenza, who becomes Victor's bride. Her father kind of takes off to fight this like quasi revolution in Italy, and she ends up becoming a beggar, which is when the Frankensteins find her and take her in as a ward. There is Justine Moritz, who is the nursemaid slash servant, and her mother is physically abusive to her. You have Caroline, who is the Frankenstein matriarch, whose father basically ruins the family through bad investments, and she's stuck taking care of him. And she's discovered, like, I think that what the Mary Shelley describes, that she is plaiting flax to make straw hats or something. So a lot of parents don't come off very well, but Victor is the worst. He's the absolute worst. And as my friend Alyssa Palambo says, he's also the ultimate tech bro.
He really is the ultimate tech bro. And one of the things that I've always found with Mary Shelley's version of Frankenstein is that on the surface you see the tech bro and you're like, oh, this great, story, but really underneath there's so many feminist layers of within the story itself that she weaves in. And for me, upon reading it, it was the horror of having to deal with that tech bro. I love
Yes.
Alyssa's the way she phrased it. I'm just going to steal it. Sorry, Alyssa.
I know we're like all hell Alyssa. We love Alyssa.
Yes. And he really, that was truly the cautionary tale of it. And when you said that you see the women through his gaze, that also reminded me of how we often see women portrayed in society through the male gaze.
Oh,
And
absolutely, absolutely. There is a section in Frankenstein after there's this horrible family tragedy that's occurred, and Victor describes Elizabeth as, well, yes, she doesn't look as beautiful as she did, but she's a more appropriate mate for a wretch such as myself.
mm-hmm.
That's almost exactly what he says. Like, well, she'd lost some of her beauty that she once had, and this and that, and the vivacity she had, but now she's a better mate for me because I'm also really miserable. So
it's yeah,
yeah,
it's astounding. And it's, this is the reason why Mary Shelley wrote such a timeless classic. I recently read another author that was quite popular. I guess I could say it. I read Carrie recently, and yeah, I did not like it. I could not. I think what strikes me between the two authors, because they're technically horror, both of them, and what strikes me between the two is that I would say that Mary Shelley, her writing is timeless, and the way her style is timeless, versus Carrie, which, please don't hate me if you're listening and you're a Stephen King fan, I found the writing to be dated, and I just I couldn't like it.
I haven't read that book since I was a teenager, so I don't remember. But that's another one of like bad parenting run amok, to say the least.
Yes.
But circling back to Mary Shelley, you have to remember her mother was, of course, Mary Wollstonecraft,
Mm-hmm.
who died 11 days after giving birth to Mary Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that Mary Shelley's love for her mother and the loss of her mother, it just really feeds Frankenstein, because what happened later was her father did remarry. Her father was William Godwin, the philosopher, and her stepmother was, they did not get along very well. So she was always kind of trying to get between the mother, rather the father, and Mary. And then later, when Mary ran away and with Percy Shelley, her father kind of rejected her. So she wrote Frankenstein at a time that she was kind of win her way back into her father's affections.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting to me that she dedicated Frankenstein to her father, but the book was written anonymously, was first published anonymously, and everyone assumed that Percy Shelley had written it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just all these themes about parenting and wanting approval and parental loss. So yeah,
This
so rich.
Yeah, Frankenstein is just such a rich novel, and there's so many layers to it, and she was truly a master of her craft. And yeah, I love that little tidbit that everybody seems to think that Percy was the one who wrote it before she actually came out saying that he was the one who wrote it, because it's a lot like I don't know if you're a fan of Elena Ferrante, if you've read any of her books.
I have not, but I have her books here. Yes.
Yeah, and so nobody knows who she is, and there have been people who have said, oh, it's a guy, no woman can write that well, it's a guy. And I was like, upon hearing, I was like, no, we're just going to dismiss that right away. It's like Mary Shelley all over again, that they just can't, admit that a woman could write a book so well. And yeah, that's my
Yeah,
take.
especially when you consider that she began writing, I think she was only 16 when she began writing it. You know, the
Mhm.
famous summer without a the summer without a what was actually the year without a summer was 1816, that there was this volcano eruption and it just totally wiped out any kind of like crops growing and such. And so she was in Geneva hanging out with, I call them the Villa Diodati gang, Lord Byron and all those others, artist types, and her stepsister Claire. And so they had the famous story about having the ghost story competition. That's what it came out of.
Mhm. Yeah, and that was such a I love the idea of all of that. It's just I fangirl over Mary Shelley and
I think we
Frankenstein.
all fangirl over Mary Shelley. I mean, you're talking to somebody that I went to when I was in London last. I had to go visit the grave and everything, and all hail.
Yes, yes, all hail Mary. Now, you brought up a couple of the historical things. I love how you blended that into the book itself. And in December, I'm actually going to be teaching a class on blending the history into the fiction. So I want to delve into this because we have the multiple uprisings, and then you also have the year without the summer that was during this time period when she was writing this book. And
Hmm.
that 19th century, the 1800s, right? Yes.
Usually it's considered that Frankenstein it takes place, and I have all of these incredible like timelines and massive, Excel spreadsheets and such that could go along the floor of my little office. Um, it's generally considered, at least the way I have it in Natural Creatures, that it begins, I believe it's 1782 and it goes to the year 1800.
Mhm.
And the interesting thing is that Geneva during that time, it stopped being a republic around that. It became dissolved into well, first it became part of the French Empire,
Mhm.
and then it became kind of subsumed into the Helvetica Republic, which is now what we know as Switzerland. As for Mary Shelley, she began writing Frankenstein in 1816, but it wasn't published till 1818. And then she came out with another edition 1823, and then the final edition, which I think it was 1831, which is the one I mainly drew from, because that's the one in which the character of Elizabeth Lavenza is referred to as basically this beggar who they find who's an orphan. In the 1818, she's his cousin by blood, and I just felt that it made more sense for her to be an orphan because I thought that it just worked better with Shelley's themes.
Yes, I agree with you on that. But that time period, because when I was writing about Antoinette's sister, she was during that late 1700s, and she died in the early 1800s. And that time period was such a tumultuous time period in history where we always think of globalization as being this new thing, but really that time was like the start of like true globalization where you have a lot of trade coming in and you've got so many wars happening. There's the American Revolution, there's the French Revolution, there's Napoleon and everything that he did in Europe, from France all the way down to Italy and throughout the whole like European continent.
Right, and don't forget what was going on in the Caribbean too. There were revolutions
Yes.
there as well as America. I mean, there's a wonderful book that I ended up using as one of my primary source, even though it wasn't a primary source, because I wish I could remember the name. It's in the other part of my office, or I should go grab it. But she really breaks down about how this theme of revolution, it was just all over the world at that time. It was everywhere. And especially like you think like in the Netherlands, there were pamphlets being published that were being sending the message everywhere and so on. So it was just like a very fecund time, very volatile as well.
And how did you manage to be able to weave that into the story? Let's go into some of the what we call the master class of it all.
Okay. The timelines. I just made all these timelines And Geneva especially was fascinating to me because first off, it was a center and there were for printing and all of these other informations and trade um, but I couldn't help but think how it must have influenced everything. There's this one part, and I'm being very cautious because I don't want to spoiler. And one of the main pieces of information that was a real eureka moment for me, I'm going to be really cautious about this. Let's just say there's a character who is executed. I'm not saying who, I'm being very coy here. Um, I realized that around the time they would have been executed was the same time that in Geneva, when everything was in upheaval, there were a number of syndics, which were basically the Geneva ruling class, who were also executed at the same time. And that was once I realized that, I thought, you know what, Shelley must have been aware of this. And indeed, when I dug deeper, I realized that Shelley had written this, it was called 6 Weeks History of a Tour Through, I think it's like, and she talks about visiting Switzerland. And it was a book that she'd written and published in order to make money when she and Shelley were wandering around Europe and such. And she writes about how that on the Plain Palais, where this particular character had been executed, and as well as the syndics, that few syndics will go there now because of what happened with this execution. I thought, oh, she's aware of that. So yeah, so it's really interesting to me that there were definitely these overlaps. And if Shelley wasn't thinking directly about it, I think it must have been in the back of her mind.
Mm.
Another consideration too was that the main way that Mary Shelley knew her mother was through her writings, as well as, of course, her father's stories and stuff. And Mary Wollstonecraft was in Paris during the French Revolution. She wrote about how when Louis XIV, rather Louis XVI, was being, taken to the guillotine, that she was forced to they were all forced to close the shutters and stuffs to not witness what was going on, because could be seen as being in support of or against what was that, not being supportive of the Republic. So I just thought there must be all these layers here that Shelley was aware of.
It's so fascinating. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about historical fiction is that we can really put in, it's not just talking about what happened, it's about being able to put our readers and ourselves into what it felt like to be there during that time period.
Yeah, I was actually able to use the revolution in Geneva as it was a very handy plot point for moving some of my characters out of Geneva into another environment where it's like I'm being so coy here. I feel like, oh, I'm teasing you, come read my book. But yeah, it's just, it's again Frankenstein. It's just so layered. And it was also such a pleasure for me to have a reason to just reread it on that kind of a granular level. And I was fortunate that I began working on the book, and it was the 200th anniversary of the first publication. So it was 2018, before the pandemic. So there were all these conferences going on where I was able to talk to various scholars and stuff. So that was really a wonderful, wonderful coincidence, if you will.
That's wonderful. And that's one of the things I love about when you're doing research, and we've talked about here on the show too, where research doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to be historical fiction. Research can go for any genre at all. But oftentimes, if you're writing a book and you reach out to a scholar, they'll be more than happy to nerd out with you over that subject. They're so happy to do that.
No, I totally agree. They're very, very generous. And I did confer with several scholars, and because I'm not an academic, so it was just, I'm so grateful to them. And I'm also really grateful that all of these things that I was reading when I was going in this granular fashion, that they were able to say, like, yes, you're not imagining this, that there is this whole theory about Frankenstein being an allegory about the revolution going on, and that the monster symbolized the people uprising against the aristocracy and this and that. So
I did not realize that allegory. That did not hit home for me until just now. And damn, that really does hit home on
Yeah, because what's the
again.
first? Well, the one of the first things that Victor Frankenstein says in Frankenstein is when it's his narration, because is there's the nested narration. His first person narration begins that he says that I am by birth a Genovese, and my family has always been basically I'm part of the aristocracy. They've always been syndics for all these
Hmm.
generations.
Hmm. Yeah, again, going back to this book is so expertly layered in so many different avenues with historical fiction. I mean, it's not just or even with horror, just it's a beautiful, brilliant piece of literature. And I do feel, and for those of you listening, I know we've kind of danced around some of the points, not to, so that we don't give away any spoilers, but the book itself is brilliant. I love it.
It's
And
very, very deeply moving too. It really is. It's so moving. So
I
yeah.
was
And I'm
also
sorry I interrupted, but yeah, we're here
I was talking
to
about your book too. Unnatural Creatures also does pay homage to all of that with the Mary Shelley story and Frankenstein.
I
And so,
really hope so. It was such an act of love for me because I just adore Frankenstein so much. And um, all I can say is if you haven't read Frankenstein, please read it. And yeah, yeah, it's just it's wonderful.
and if you have read Frankenstein, you should go and read Unnatural Creatures because it is such a wonderful compendium. It feels so much like a compendium to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein because you get to delve so much deeper into that world that surrounds Victor.
Well, when I was writing it, I set up several rules for myself. The first was that anything that happened in my novel had to work within Mary Shelley's timeline.
Mhm.
And the second was anything that happened it had to make sense within that timeline in which either it had to occur when Victor was, because he's kind of an unreliable narrator, when he's either off stage, so to speak, or in a way that it would make sense even if it wasn't his perspective. And third was that I had to work with the history. So it made it a little tricky, which is why I had all of these, PowerPoints and timelines and Excel spreadsheets. But sometimes there's a lot to be said, and I'm sure you feel this way, Diana, about having certain constraints
Mm-hmm.
that they force you to be creative and to go deeper.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am a firm believer that plotting and does not limit us. It can help us really hone in our artistry.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And I also, in addition to Unnatural Creatures, you also have a tarot book. Yes?
I have a tarot book. Yes, I have this whole history of working with the tarot for the past, oh gosh, like over 30 years. It makes me sound very old, but I feel old. I was just saying to Diana before we started recording about how my daughter just left for college. So yeah, so I created this tarot deck called the Goddess Tarot, and it's its 25th anniversary. So I created this book that's a compendium to it, which is a full color book, and it has all of the definitions for the cards, as well as all the goddess myths, as well as a lot of art, because I also have worked as a book illustrator. And yeah, so I created this book and we did a Kickstarter, and it's made a lot of, to me, what feels like a lot of money. It made almost $24,000. So I'm working on that now. So I kind of like going back and forth between making things that are kind of art book oriented, because I also have illustrated books, like I said, or tarot or whatever, and also making these really densely written and more researched historical novels as well. So the Goddess Tarot was something I created. Again, it was kind of a way to reclaim women's stories, in the same way with writing Unnatural Creatures was about reclaiming the Frankenstein women's stories. So yeah, it just amazes me that it's still in print, and it's has like 250,000 copies in print, and makes me feel very happy.
Yes, and you brought your tarot cards with you?
I have tarot cards. Yeah, would you like me to pull some for you? And they're from the
Sure.
Goddess Tarot,
I would love
which
that. Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah.
which it has 22 different goddesses on the major arcana. And the minor arcana, you can hear me like shuffling the cards, are also related to goddesses.
And that's so fascinating. I mean, we always think of, when we think of goddesses, we think of the Norse and we think of the Greek goddesses and the Roman goddesses, but there are so many and the religions around the world that people can look to and hear their stories, because and and I feel like it's a very much a historical thing as well, where
That's I'm glad you said that, because it was something that when I was working on this deck, I really wanted to have goddesses from around the world. So there's goddesses from Africa, there's goddesses from the Caribbean, there's a Native American goddess, as well as, you would expect like the Roman Greek, as well as the Norse. But I'm married to an anthropologist, so I kind of think about things that way.
oh,
And
I love
but I
anthropology.
really,
That was my
yeah.
minor. That was my
Oh,
minor in
I didn't
college.
know. Oh, wow. So I really approached the tarot cards as kind of another storytelling tool,
Mm.
only with pictures and stuff. So let's pull some cards and
All
see what
right.
story you want to tell. Let's do it,
Alrighty.
Diana.
Okay.
And I'm shuffling now. Do you have a particular question in mind?
No, I don't. I'm
You
open
don't.
to a general reading.
All right. So usually the question I use under these circumstances
Hmm.
is, what do you need to know at this time?
Okay. Yes.
And I will pull the cards and tell you what they mean, and then maybe you can tell me if something strikes your fancy.
Okay.
And you tell me when you want me to stop shuffling. You can hear the cards being shuffled.
Okay. I think you've shuffled plenty
All
now.
right. Should I cut the deck?
Yes.
I thought so. I felt that too. So I have the Princess of Cups, which is a card that's associated with creative inspiration, as well as just being receptive to that inspiration. And it's just about being really open to things coming to you in a way that you don't expect,
Mm.
in an intuitive sort of fashion. I'll describe what the card looks like, since this is a podcast. It shows a beautiful young woman drinking from a cup, because it is the Princess of Cups. And she's got like a moon kind of shimmering behind her head, and she has beautiful light blue robes on, and she's a border of water around her, because cups are associated with the element of water. That's the first card I've chosen.
Mm.
So, and it could be for, like artistic inspiration for a book, or also just being, I think it's about being emotionally receptive as well, too, because water has to do with like the sort of things that churn through us for better, for worse. But usually the Princess of Cups, she's receptive, she's gentle. She may be a little cautious about being too forward, but she's basically, she's got a really good heart. And she is one of what we call the court cards in the minor arcana. The court cards are, in this particular deck, are Prince, Princess, King, and Queen. And it's kind of not that different from playing cards, only we have four instead of three. And the playing cards, it would be Jack, Queen, King.
Mm.
So let's choose another card for you. And we could even think of that like as symbolizing your past
Mm.
for what you need to know at this time. So let's see. Let's choose a card for your present. You tell me when you want me to stop.
Okay. I can stop.
Yeah. And I think I want to pull this one from the top.
Okay.
I have the Sun, which is a major arcana card. Major arcana cards usually show up when there's really big changes going on in a life. What I love about this card is that it has also to do with creativity, but it's more about shining it out into the world, with taking what you have and sharing it. It also has to do with children.
Hmm. Well, I
Yeah,
mean, I know
about
those of
starting
you
your
on
own
the
family.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's also about, if you've been working on projects, this is a great card to have show up, because it's really about like the sun, like literally sharing it, shining all over the place. And with the goddess tarot, it has to do with these Russian goddesses called the Zorya, who are guardians to the sun god. And there's three of them. So they're kind of like a triple goddess. And one is named Twilight, one is named Midnight, and one is named Dawn, if I remember correctly. I'm
Mhm.
just kind of remembering off the top of my head. And they're just really majestic, and they serve as, they help the sun god shed his light everywhere. So that's kind of where you are right now. It's like shedding your light, sharing your talents, being open to these new experiences.
I love it. That's great. For those of you listening, you all know I've talked about it that we're starting our foster parent journey, and I've got a book out
Perfect.
mission. So that
That's
these are
perfect.
wonderful
Yeah,
cards for me.
that's exactly what it is. Well, it's interesting to me because the Princess of Cups is more receptive, whereas the Sun is more about like, here it is, I'm sharing it, I'm ready, I'm open.
Mhm.
So let's choose one to symbolize a possible future that you need to know at this time. And if we don't like it, we can choose another card. So let me know when you want me to stop.
Okay.
All right. Do you want me to cut the cards or take from the top?
Um, let's cut the cards.
Okay. Yeah, let's see. All right. I have the Three of Staves, which I'm holding it up even though people can't see it at home, but you'll have to imagine it. It is a woman looking out into the vista, the distance, and it's basically about you've done what you can, you've set your work out into the world, and now you're waiting to hear back. So I think there's going to be an element of waiting around and trying to trust that you've done all you can.
Mhm.
Staves have to do with active creativity. It's very different from the cups, which is more receptive. I always like to compare it to if the cups are about like, water and planting seeds and so on and so forth, like the inception of a project. Staves are very much about, okay, well, here's the first thing, which is growing up, the first, sapling. It's very tender and you can protect it, but it's also very active. It's also very sturdy. So I see this as being a period where you've done what you can and now you have to wait, but you also can feel kind of trusting that it's going to work out. I think the challenge is going to be being patient.
Yeah, that's always a challenge for me.
So I know it's like that old song, the waiting is the hardest part. And I'm going to choose one more as an overview.
Okay.
And you let me know when you want me to stop shuffling
Okay, yeah, stop.
and take from the top.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, another major arcana card. We have the love card, which is to do the goddess Venus, which is about harmony and love and being receptive. And but it's more than just being receptive in the cups kind of way. It's just it's also there's a sense of balance between the different forces in your life. Like it could be between you and your partner, you and other things, whether it's your agent or editors and such. But it's also for romantic love, it's also just a very, very positive card as well, of just really understanding what the true nature of passionate attachment is and working with it in a healthy way.
Mm, I love that. Thank you.
Okay. And that has to do with the goddess Venus, and we know who the goddess Venus is.
Oh, we all do. She's, I think, one of the most
Yeah.
infamous goddesses out there.
She's very popular. Yeah.
Well, Kris, I'm going to, since I know you have another podcast that you have to record, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure.
It's so to be able to catch up, to be able to do this. It was wonderful having you. For those of you listening, if you want to pick up your own copy of the Goddess Tarot, I'll have a link in the show notes so that you can go ahead and purchase it. And then also, if you're interested in picking up your own copy of Unnatural Creatures, we will, of course, have a link in our show notes to bookshop.org. As always, bookshop.org supports all of the wonderful authors that come on the show to share their books with you, but it also supports this podcast and your local independent bookstore. So please go ahead and pick up your copy of Unnatural Creatures. And Kris, we're just going to have you come back again.
Oh, I would love that. And thank you so much. And good luck with all your exciting things happening in your life. It all sounds so exciting and positive and receptive and very, very Princess of Cups and all that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And you have a wonderful time and enjoy being an empty nester.
Yeah, it's a huge change. Yeah.
It is.
All
Yeah,
right.
we're in these two. We were talking before we started that
Yeah,
we're in these two different elements. I'm getting
I
ready to start a
know.
family. Kris is an empty nester, and it's a
Ah.
wonderful dynamic to be able to sit here and talk about that.
Yeah, well, when you need the advice for the parenting, I'm here. I don't know how helpful I'll be, but I
Oh,
can
I am
share
sure I will
experiences.
have
Every
it.
child is different. That's the thing, is like, it's but as a friend of mine says, you get the child that you're meant to have, and that is meant for you. So
I love that.
yeah.
Yes. Well,
All right. Well, thank you.
thank you and have a good night.
You too.
Okay. Bye.